It was supposed to be just another dull Friday night. With no plans and nothing to do, Josh came up with this grand idea to visit my grandma's old house. I hadn't set foot there since she passed away, and the place always gave me the creeps. Still, it was better than sitting around in boredom. Standing at the front door, I felt a sharp breeze brushing against my skin. The house appeared darker than I remembered, and the silence, it was thick, almost oppressive. I didn't say a word, though. Luke, ever the joker, cracked some remark about the place being haunted, and we all laughed, but it felt forced. Inside, the cold was more biting. Dust clung to the furniture, and old family photos lined the walls like forgotten memories. It felt like time had frozen in place since the day she passed. There was something off about the atmosphere, like we weren't entirely alone. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. While rummaging through the attic, Megan spotted a weathered box tucked away in a corner. Always the curious one, she dragged it out without a second thought. "Guys, check this out," she said, holding up an ancient-looking board, its surface thick with dust. It was a Ouija board. Luke scoffed. "You've got to be kidding me. You actually believe in that crap?" Josh, grinning, was clearly on board with whatever Megan was planning. "Come on, what's the worst that could happen, right?" Something inside me tensed. Maybe it was the board's strange gleam under the dim light, or the memory of my grandma's warnings about things best left alone. Still, I didn't want to be the buzzkill. We gathered around the old coffee table in the living room, where the silence was now deafening. Megan set the board down, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Who's going to start?" None of us really believed in this stuff. It was just a creepy game. Or so we thought. Luke took charge as usual. "All right, let's get this over with." His voice was casual, but his hands shook slightly as we all placed our fingers on the planchette. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on us. I could hear the faint sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. We asked silly questions, laughing to break the tension. "Is anyone here?" Josh mocked, but nothing happened. Not at first. We were about to pack it up when a sudden creak echoed from somewhere deep within the house. Sharp and unsettling. The kind of sound that makes your stomach drop. We froze. "What the hell was that?" Megan whispered, her wide eyes betraying her fear. I wanted to dismiss it as just the house settling, but deep down, I knew better. A quick glance at my friends' faces told me they knew it too. We weren't alone. The temperature in the room seemed to drop further, a knot tightening in my gut. We sat in silence, straining to hear anything. The creak had stopped, but now the house felt alive, like it was watching us. "Probably just the wind," Luke muttered, his attempt at sounding casual failing. The uncertainty in his voice was unmistakable. Megan wasn't ready to let it go. She leaned closer to the board, her eyes darting from the planchette to the shadowed corners of the room. "Let's ask again," she said, her voice quieter now, more serious. "Is anyone here?" For a moment, nothing. Then the planchette shifted. A tiny movement, barely an inch. My breath caught in my throat. "No way," Josh murmured. "All right, who's messing with us?" "It's not us," Megan whispered, her voice shaky, eyes glued to the board. "I swear." This time the planchette moved further, sliding slowly until it stopped on the word, "Yes." A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to pull my hand away, but something held me there. We exchanged nervous glances, and I could see fear beginning to settle into the group. Even Luke, always the skeptic, looked pale. "Okay, joke's over," Josh said, trying to laugh it off. "You can stop now." But Megan's hand remained steady on the planchette. "It's not me." The lights flickered once, twice, then went out for a split second before snapping back on. We all jumped. Megan let out a nervous laugh, clearly unsettled. "Weird? Maybe it's just the power." "Sure," Luke muttered, but his eyes told a different story. The atmosphere was getting heavier, like the air itself was thickening around us. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept silent, unwilling to admit how wrong this felt. Megan drew a breath and asked the next question. "Who are you?" The planchette remained still at first. We all exhaled, thinking it was over. But then, ever so slowly, it began to move again, inching across the board, letter by letter. "M-A-R," it stopped. We stared at the board, the letters hanging in the air like an unfinished sentence. "Mar?" Josh asked, breaking the tense silence. "What's that supposed to mean?" A loud creak broke through the room, closer this time, as if something or someone was walking right outside the door. I swallowed hard, my chest tight with fear. "We need to stop," I whispered. "This doesn't feel right anymore." But Megan shook her head, a determined glint in her eyes. "No, we need to know more." Before I could argue, the lights flickered again, and the air seemed to grow even colder, heavier. We were no longer just playing a game. We were in over our heads. Megan's eyes were fixed on the Ouija board, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the planchette. I wanted to stop. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't speak. Fear, or something more, held me in place. "Mar," Megan muttered, as if saying the name aloud would bring clarity. "Maybe it's a name. Or maybe it's nothing," Luke countered, though his usual confidence was fading fast. He glanced toward the door like he was considering running for it. "This is just a stupid game, right?" None of us answered. The silence stretched on until Beth, who had been strangely quiet up until that point, stood abruptly. "I'm done with this," she muttered, walking toward the bookshelf. "This is ridiculous." Beth began pulling random books from the shelves. Her movements hurried as if she was trying to distract herself from the tension. Then she paused, her eyes locking onto something. "Hey, John," she said, turning to me. "This looks like your grandma's handwriting." She held out an old leather-bound book, the cover dusted with years of neglect. My heart skipped a beat. I stepped closer, my throat tight as I realized what it was, my grandmother's diary. "I didn't know she had one," I said, my voice barely audible. Beth handed it to me and I flipped through the yellowed pages. The entries started innocently enough, describing her daily life, gardening, cooking, caring for the house. But soon, darker details emerged. Mentions of seances, shadowy figures in her dreams, and spirits she claimed to have spoken to. My hands shook as I read a passage aloud. "There's something in this house. I've felt it for years. It whispers, but I can't understand its words. I've tried to keep it locked away, but the board is its door." The room fell deathly silent. My heart pounded as I looked up at my friends. Megan's face had gone pale, and Josh's usual smirk was nowhere to be seen. "Wait," Beth said, sitting back down slowly, her voice tight with fear. "Is she talking about that Ouija board? This one?" I nodded, barely able to swallow the growing lump in my throat. My grandmother had known about this, whatever was in the house, and she had tried to keep it contained. But now we had opened that door again. "We need to stop," I said, standing suddenly, my heart racing. "We shouldn't have touched it." Before anyone could respond, a loud thud echoed through the room. The lights flickered violently, and the planchette jerked across the board as if pulled by an unseen force. We all jumped back, terror gripping us. Luke was the first to break the silence, his voice shaking. "John, what the hell did your grandma do?" I wanted to explain, to tell Luke I had no idea what my grandmother had gotten involved in, but the words stuck in my throat. It didn't matter. We needed to leave. Now. "We need to stop this," I repeated, my voice firmer this time. "We're done." But as soon as I reached for the planchette to shove it off the board, the entire table shook violently. The lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness. "Guys?" Megan's voice trembled, barely a whisper. "What's happening?" Before anyone could answer, another loud thud reverberated through the house, this time coming from somewhere deeper inside. My heart raced as I strained to listen. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to cast a weak glow around the room. The others huddled close, fear etched on their faces. The footsteps stopped, just outside the room, and we all held our breath. The lights snapped back on, but the air felt thick, heavier, colder. Suddenly, the planchette started moving on its own, jerking erratically across the board. We all stepped back, eyes wide, as it spelled out a single word: "Stay." A suffocating fear gripped my chest. "No," I muttered, my voice cracking. "No, we're leaving." I grabbed Josh's arm and pulled him toward the door. Beth was already ushering Megan along. But when we reached the door, it wouldn't budge. Luke yanked on the handle with all his strength, but it was as if something was holding it shut from the other side. "It's locked," Luke gasped, panic creeping into his voice. "What the hell is going on? We need to get out of here," I shouted, rushing toward the nearest window. I tried opening it, but it wouldn't move. The entire house seemed to have come alive, trapping us inside. "What do we do?" Megan cried, her voice breaking. I didn't have an answer. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but nothing made sense. The room felt like it was closing in on us, and I could feel something watching. Something unseen, but very real. Luke, still at the door, froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. We all stopped, listening. There it was again, a low, guttural sound like a growl echoing from the hallway. Then, without warning, a picture frame flew off the wall, shattering as it hit the floor. Megan screamed, and Josh stumbled back, knocking over a chair in his panic. My heart pounded in my ears as I struggled to breathe. We had to get out, now, and then I heard it. A voice, soft, almost a whisper, calling my name. The voice whispered again, clearer this time, sending a chill down my spine. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes scanned the room, but none of my friends had spoken. They were all huddled together, their faces twisted in fear. "John." The whisper came again, closer now, insistent. I could barely form the words. Did you hear that?" I stammered, my voice weak, almost drowned out by the pounding in my ears. Megan nodded, her face drained of color. "It said your name." I didn't want to believe it, but there was no denying it now. Something was in the house, and it knew me. A cold shiver crawled down my spine as my gaze drifted back to the Ouija board. The planchette had gone still, but the air around it seemed to pulse, as if the room itself was alive, feeding off our fear. "We need to figure this out," Beth said, her voice trembling but determined. "That diary, what else did your grandma write?" With shaking hands, I fumbled for the leather-bound book, flipping through its pages frantically. The words blurred as my fingers raced over the entries, my panic growing. Then I found it, the passage that stopped me cold. "There is a spirit tied to this house. It seeks a host. I've tried to keep it at bay, but I fear my time is running out. Only blood can bind it, and only blood can set it free." "Blood?" Luke's voice cracked, his usual confidence long gone. "What does that mean?" I could barely bring myself to say it. It's me, it wants me." The silence that followed was suffocating. My friends stared at me, their faces mirroring the fear I felt. I didn't know what this thing wanted or why it had chosen me, but it had been waiting, watching. Josh grabbed my arm, his voice laced with panic. "What do we do, man? How do we stop it?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. The truth was, I didn't know if we could stop it. Before I could respond, a loud bang echoed from the basement, the kind of sound that makes your blood run cold. It was as if something heavy had crashed to the floor. Megan's eyes widened with terror. "It's coming from the basement." "No," I shook my head, my heart racing. "We're not going down there." But the planchette began to move again, spelling out one word over and over, "John." Each letter scraped across the board with a jarring, deafening sound, like nails on a chalkboard. Faster and faster, the planchette spun, my name repeating in a terrifying rhythm. The room seemed to close in on us, the noise filling every corner. "We need to stop this," Beth cried, her voice on the edge of panic. "Now." Without thinking, I grabbed the board and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a thud, the sound echoing in the silence that followed. But then the door to the basement creaked open. We all froze, staring at the dark space beyond the door. It was like the blackness from below had spilled into the room, an invitation we couldn't refuse. Deep down, I knew we had no choice. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. "We have to go down there," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Luke shook his head, backing away. "No way, man, I'm not going down there." But I knew we had no other option. The entity had been trapped here for years, waiting for this moment, waiting for me. And now, it was ready to claim what it came for. "We end this," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "Right now." Taking a deep breath, I stepped toward the basement door. The darkness in the basement was overwhelming, swallowing everything as we descended. Each step felt heavier, like the weight of the air was pressing down on us, trying to keep us from moving forward. My friends followed, their footsteps slow, hesitant. Fear clung to us like a shadow. At the bottom of the stairs, the cold was unbearable, seeping into my bones. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, each one visible in the frigid air. The flashlight in my hand flickered, casting distorted shadows on the walls. Everything around us felt wrong, twisted.
"John."
The voice came again, this time from the far corner of the basement. I swallowed hard, unable to speak. I aimed the weak beam of the flashlight toward the sound, revealing an old, dust-covered mirror standing against the wall. It was tall, with an ornate frame that looked out of place in the cold, damp basement. "That's it," Beth whispered, stepping up beside me. The mirror. My stomach dropped. My grandmother's diary had mentioned this mirror, how she had used it in her attempts to trap the spirit that haunted the house. But it hadn't worked. The spirit was still here, waiting for me. I walked toward the mirror, my reflection barely visible beneath the thick layer of dust. But then, behind my own reflection, I saw something else. Something dark, lurking just beyond the glass.
"John?"
The voice whispered again, and I spun around, but there was nothing behind me. Just my friends, their faces pale with fear. "We need to break it," Megan said, her voice trembling. "That's what your grandma was trying to do, right? Trap it in the mirror?" I nodded, but my hands felt frozen, heavy with dread. "But if we break it, we don't know what will happen." Luke stepped forward, gripping my shoulder tightly. "We don't have a choice, man. We have to end this." I turned back to the mirror, feeling the entity's presence growing stronger. It was as if I could feel it breathing down my neck, its energy pressing against me. Luke was right. This thing was tied to me. My grandmother had known it all along. And now, it was my turn to finish what she couldn't. Without another word, I grabbed a metal rod lying on the floor. The weight of it felt solid in my hand. I took a deep breath and swung it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, shards flying in all directions. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The air hung heavy with anticipation. Then, everything erupted at once. The room shook violently, as though the entire house was coming apart. The lights flickered wildly, and a howling wind tore through the basement, swirling around us in a chaotic storm. My friend's screams were drowned out by the deafening roar of the wind. The entity's presence grew stronger, more malevolent, pushing against me with a force that took my breath away. I could feel it pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. "John." Megan's voice broke through the chaos, her hand gripping my arm. "We have to get out of here." But I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were rooted to the spot, the entity's hold on me tightening with every second. It wasn't done. It wasn't going to let me go. In the shattered glass on the floor, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. But it wasn't me staring back. The face in the glass was twisted and dark, its eyes empty and lifeless. It was smiling, a cold, malicious grin that made my blood run cold. I realized then what it wanted. I was the key. My blood, my life, was the price to pay for it to be free. My grandmother had tried to stop it, but she hadn't been strong enough. Now it was up to me. With a final burst of strength, I grabbed one of the sharp shards of glass from the floor, my hand trembling. I didn't want to do this, but I knew there was no other way. If I didn't stop it now, it would escape, and none of us would survive. I gritted my teeth and drove the shard into my palm. Pain shot through me as blood dripped onto the broken mirror. The wind howled louder and the presence recoiled. My blood, it was the final piece it needed, or the very thing that could banish it. The lights flickered one last time, and then silence. The cold lifted. The air returned to normal. The presence was gone. I stood there, panting, the shard slipping from my hand as I stumbled back. My friends rushed to my side, their faces a mix of relief and disbelief. "It's over," I whispered, my voice weak. "I think it's over." We stumbled up from the basement, dazed, shaken, but alive. The house had gone eerily silent, no more flickering lights, no strange creaks or distant footsteps. The only sounds were the faint hum of the wind outside and the creaking of the old wooden floors beneath our feet. I still felt the sting in my palm where the glass had cut me, but the bleeding had stopped. The others stayed close as we made our way back to the living room, all too exhausted to speak. The weight of what had just happened hung heavy in the air, suffocating any attempt at conversation. "It's over," Megan whispered softly, almost as if she was trying to convince herself. I nodded, but deep down, something felt wrong. The tension in my chest hadn't eased, and a nagging unease gnawed at me. The mirror was shattered, the entity supposedly banished, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over. We reached the front door, and this time it opened easily. With the cold night air hit my face, a stark contrast to the suffocating stillness we'd just escaped. One by one, we stepped outside into the pale moonlight. The chill in the air was almost a relief, though the unease still lingered, clinging to me like a shadow. I took a deep breath and turned to glance back at the house, its dark windows staring back like empty, soulless eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A figure, a shadow shifting behind the glass. I blinked, and it was gone. "John," Beth called softly from the sidewalk, her voice laced with concern. "Come on, let's go." I hesitated, my gaze lingering on the house. My reflection caught my eye, just a faint, distorted image of myself in the window's glass. Then, to my horror, it smiled. It wasn't me. I froze, a wave of cold dread washing over me. My reflection stared back at me, its grin dark and twisted. It widened slowly, unnaturally, and I felt a creeping fear clawing its way up my spine. My friends called my name again, but their voices sounded distant, muffled. All I could do was stand there, locked in a silent, chilling stare with that horrible, smiling reflection. And then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished. Just my normal reflection now, looking just as terrified as I felt. I turned away from the house, my heart pounding in my chest. We walked away in silence, but deep down I knew something had followed us. I could feel it, lurking just behind me, waiting. It wasn't over. The drive home was quiet, too quiet. My friends exchanged occasional glances, but no one said much. The atmosphere in the car was thick with the unspoken fear that none of us dared to voice. We were safe, or at least we had made it out of the house, but the terror of what had happened still gripped us. I stared out the window, trying to make sense of everything. My grandmother's warnings, the entity, the mirror. None of it seemed real, but the events of that night were undeniable. The throbbing pain in my hand was proof enough. We dropped Beth and Megan off first. Both of them offered weak smiles, but it was clear they were just as shaken as I was. "Stay safe," Beth whispered before closing the car door, her eyes lingering on me for a moment longer than usual. Josh dropped me off next. "You sure you're all right, man?" he asked, his voice unusually soft. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'll be fine. Just need some rest." "Call me if you need anything," he added before driving off, leaving me standing alone outside my house. The night was colder than usual, a biting chill that settled deep in my bones. I made my way inside, locking the door behind me. The house was dark and still, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel safe in my own home. I headed straight for the bathroom, eager to clean the cut on my palm. As I ran the water, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror above the sink. My reflection looked haggard, drained from the night's events. I leaned in closer, staring at the reflection of my eyes, tired but mine. Then the smile returned. It started small, just a slight upward twitch of the lips, but it grew, dark and menacing, spreading across my reflection's face like a disease. My heart raced as I backed away, my eyes locked on the twisted grin staring back at me. I turned around quickly, my breath catching in my throat. There was nothing behind me, just the empty bathroom. But when I looked back at the mirror, the smile was still there, cruel and mocking. Panic set in. My reflection wasn't just mimicking me anymore. It was something else, something darker, something that had followed me from the house. It wasn't done with me. I stumbled out of the bathroom, my heart hammering in my chest. The shadows in my house seemed to stretch and grow, creeping along the walls like they were alive, watching me. I could feel it, something in the room with me, lurking just out of sight. I rushed to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of it all. Was it real, or was I losing my mind? I crawled into bed, pulling the blankets up to my chin like a child afraid of the dark. The house was silent, save for the sound of my own ragged breathing. But even in the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I lay there for what felt like hours, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. And then, just as sleep began to pull me under, I heard it, a soft whisper.
"John."